Thank much to Mark Bedard and also to Editor-in-Chief Bob Cusack. I called him Editor-at-Large, just wishful thinking. Bob is also helping lead this next conversation. Senator Gary Peters from Michigan is chairman of the Surface Transportation, Maritime, Freight, and Port Subcommittee. In response to the supply chain disruptions caused by the pandemic, he is supporting the manufacture of automotive goods in the United States. Take a listen to this conversation with The Hill's Editor-in-Chief, Bob Cusack.
Senator Peters, thanks for joining us today.
Well, good to be with you, Bob.
Well, I want to start out with a big picture question. You've been working on AVs and electric vehicles for the longest time. Where are we and where do we need to go? And what does Congress need to do to help the industry?
Well, we're at a little different place with each of those. Clearly, electric vehicles are moving very rapidly. We're seeing a commitment from automakers in Michigan. Our big three automakers are making substantial investments in electric. We're seeing really leaning forward. General Motors is talking about electrifying nearly all of their fleet in the coming years. Ford there as well. And so that is very exciting. And talk about how we continue to move that forward. I think if you look at some of the aspects of the investments we're making, particularly in the infrastructure package for charging stations, for example, will continue to bring the kind of consumer acceptance that you need for electric vehicles, that range anxiety that people have if they can find a charging station. Although now when you're looking at the range of individual electric vehicles, they're clearly far in excess of what a normal person is going to use in any given day. So for their normal activities every day, they can just charge it back at home and not have to worry. I think that you're going to continue to see more of that adopted. When it comes to the autonomous vehicles, which is truly the future of mobility without question, that is moving along well. And you're starting to see some products right now that are really adopting some of those autonomous features, things that protect you from changing a lane and hitting a car, the braking systems that are also set up to automatically brake if you're coming close to a car. So you're already seeing aspects of autonomy now, but we're still a few years away before I think you start seeing really more widespread production and use of autonomous vehicles. But back to your question, what does the Congress need to do? I mean, part of that are setting regulations in place to allow autonomous vehicles to be out on our highway. And that's legislation that I've been working on with Senator Thune for some time, and we're continuing to move forward with that.
You've introduced a number of bills on semiconductors. We have a supply chain issue in this country. It is a complicated problem. Do you think your legislation can move this year? And what do federal agencies need to do better? It's because so many people are so frustrated and there's no one easy answer, it seems.
No, there isn't one easy answer, but the one thing we know for sure is the problem is going to get bigger. So we have to address it. I had a hearing in Detroit, met with folks who are manufacturers of semiconductor components and tooling systems, with representing the auto industry, representing labor unions. But it is clear that we've got to increase our manufacturing capacity in the United States of America. We cannot be dependent on foreign sources for semiconductors. I chair Homeland Security Committee as well. This is a Homeland Security issue. This is a national security issue. We have to have supply chains that are not just efficient, but are resilient. And that means that we know that we can get those semiconductors. And that's why the CHIPS Act is so important. We have to pass the CHIPS Act. I was able to get a provision in there for $2 billion for legacy chips, which are the older chips, not the cutting edge new stuff that we have to invest in, which is the $50 billion in that CHIPS Act. The $2 billion, though, are for the chips that we're using today, every single day in the auto industry, for example. And in fact, some higher end automobiles have have several thousand chips in them. We've got to make sure we have a steady supply. And when you're thinking of chips in your car, clearly it's some advanced operations with the engine, but some of the stuff is just as simple as heated seats and making sure when you push the button, your window goes up and down. That all requires a chip, which is why we have to produce it here in this country.
And that's been part of the problem, is that we've been too reliant on China. And obviously the pandemic has put a spotlight on that, but this was a problem long before the pandemic, right?
Well, it was no question, and I say it's broader than just semiconductor chips. In fact, back in 2019, at that time I was the ranking member of Homeland Security, and we did a report on drug shortages that we were experiencing in this country, which was having a significant impact both on the availability of drugs as well as the price. And what we looked at is that hospitals all across this country often have to get together and say, we have a shortage in this particular drug. What are we going to do to make up for it? Because our patients still need the benefits from this drug. And normally what they would have to do is either find a drug that was less effective. And when they did, it usually was also more expensive. And so it was clear as a result of that study, that we are overly dependent on foreign sources. In fact, the precursors that go into nearly every drug that we use are 80% come from China. And the conclusion that I had in that report back in 2019 was, when there is a pandemic in the United States, we're going to find ourselves in a very precarious situation. Little did I know, a few months later, here we were, and we saw the shortages in personal protection equipment, basic medical supplies. So it's not just chips, it's really critical things that we need to be thinking about in our supply chain that are essential for our economic security as well as our national security.
What's a realistic timeline for the country to get on better footing? Because this is not going to happen overnight.
Well, it's not. I mean, right now we want to have more transparency of semiconductor supplies now. And so in the short term, the Biden administration has leaned in heavily for that to try to identify where these chips are so that we can get them. But ultimately, my main focus and why I had the hearing and why I'm such a supporter of the CHIPS Act is that we have to build the facilities in the United States, these plans. We've had some encouraging announcements, a great one in Ohio with a large semiconductor facility going to be built in Ohio, one in Arizona. We're hoping Michigan will be on that list soon with a facility. And it's not just the fabrication, it's the entire supply chain and the equipment makers going into that are important for us to start building now. But as I mentioned at the outset of this interview, this problem's only getting bigger. So we can't afford to wait any longer. We have to make these investments, understanding that any kind of short-term fix we have now is going to be completely inadequate in the matter of a short few years anyway. So we have to start making those investments today.
As you know, Senator, there's not a lot of legislative vehicles that happen certainly every election year. They're few and far between. So some of these fixes could they be as part of the competitiveness bill? Is some of this could be included in some type of revamp, Build Back Better? I mean, what do you see in the short term for the remainder of the year legislatively?
Well, certainly, let's hope we can get this Competes Act through, which has the CHIPS Act, and I would say there is I think a great deal of support, and certainly in the Senate. I know it's there in the House, and people understand the urgency of this. So I'm hopeful we will be able to get that passed. But I'm still focused on my AV START Act that I'm working on with Senator Thune in a bipartisan way. We're working with our House members that are also working on autonomous vehicle legislation. It's not going to be ready in the short term. We still have issues that we have to work through. But any kind of vehicle that comes forward, I think it's critically important we move it. If we hear from the auto companies, they're running out of time. They need to be able to get out on the road more in order to fully test these vehicles. And you can do it on a track and you can have smaller number of vehicles under the current regulation, but you really need to have some scale in order for this to work. And I look at this certainly as a competitiveness issue. We have our competitors around the world realize that the future of mobility in the world is autonomous vehicles. The Chinese are investing massive amounts of money in this technology. We don't want them to get too far ahead where we can't catch up, which is why we have to advance this regulatory framework. And it's always a little more complicated in the United States. The Chinese can just dictate whatever they want.
Right.
We have to go through a democratic process, which is better in my mind, much better, but it does take more time. But we've got to speed up our ability to do that.
You mentioned cybersecurity. You are chair of the Homeland Security Committee. A couple of years ago, Jay Powell, who heads the Federal Reserve, told 60 Minutes that what keeps him up at night is the threat of cyber. And now that is an increased risk with the invasion of Ukraine. Does this issue keep you up at night? And what do policymakers need to do? Because if this happens, obviously the results can be catastrophic.
No question about it. It does keep me up. We're working on this issue daily in Homeland Security. In fact, we just passed major legislation that is critically important for us to be able to better safeguard our systems. It's an incident reporting legislation that's been in the works for some time. My legislation, I worked with Senator Portman and others to get this passed. It actually passed unanimously out of the Senate, along with some other reforms for FedRAMP, which deals with cloud computing, FISMA, which really coordinates and streamlines federal cyber activities. But the main crux of it was incident reporting. What this addresses is a problem that was identified by both CISA, our cybersecurity infrastructure security agency within Homeland Security, the FBI. They said the number one problem we have is we don't even know the extent of the cyber attacks that we have. It's been estimated maybe we only know 25 to 30% of the attacks that are actually occurring in our country. And you need to have, basically, you need to have situational awareness. You know, think of a military operation. You're going to war. One of the most important things at the start of it is situational awareness. You have to know where the enemy is. What sort of weapons do they have? Where are you? What sort of material do you have? What's the geography? You need to have all that information to put together your battle plan. Same thing with cyber. And if we only know 25 to 30% of what's happening out there, we can't effectively fight against these attacks, nor can we effectively warn people of what's actually out there so that individual, particularly critical infrastructures or projects can make sure that they're hardening their defenses going forward. So we passed that through the omnibus, signed into law now. And now we're going to be in a position where we're going to get more information. I know one of the press outlets called this legislation the most significant cyber legislation passed in history. So that's we were pleased to see that, but it is overdue, but we're not done yet. We still have a lot more to do.
That's a pretty good review. My last question is, you wear a lot of hats. One of the hats is in charge of the campaign committee, and this is kind of news of the day / news of the year. Are you confident that Democrats can not only retain the majority, but you've actually put the goal of growing the majority? And Republicans say, you know, they're licking their chops now, and they do have some contested primaries. But are you confident that the Democrats will be the majority party in the upper chamber next year?
I am confident. I think we're putting all the pieces together to do that. And first off, let me talk about our incumbents that are up. We've got incumbents who are running in states that Joe Biden won. So that's good turf to be running on. And then on top of that, they are incredibly talented, both candidates and senators. You know, all of our targeted races are folks who know how to win. They've either outperformed the top of the ticket in their previous races, or they've won in just tough years. So they are battle-hardened candidates. If you look at some of the mechanics of a campaign, like fundraising, they are setting all sorts of records in the amount of resources that they have. We're setting a record for us at the DSCC as well. So we'll have the resources. And clearly the elections are about contrast, and there's going to be a clear contrast for the voters of where Democrats have been to help us get through the pandemic, have an infrastructure plan that rebuilds critical infrastructure, brings down costs for families on prescription drugs and other areas. So I feel very good about bringing back all the incumbents. So that gets us to 50. But as you mentioned, I think we can go on the offense. There are a number of states that look good. I'll just mention two, both Wisconsin and Pennsylvania. Again, two states that Joe Biden won. We've got great candidates running. We have primaries there, but you know our primaries are between all candidates that can win. And you contrast that to what's happening in Pennsylvania on the Republican side. They're just beating the heck out of each other. And we're going to have a weakened flaw candidate to go against our candidate in Pennsylvania. And I think the incumbent Republican running in Wisconsin also will have significant challenges against whoever our nominee is. So I'm confident on 50 and shooting for 52 or more.
Is it fair to say that the DSCC has taken more of a hands-off approach in primaries, where the committee used to get more involved? Not so much this time around, but maybe, you never know, down the road between now and November? Or is it going to be the committee going to be like, listen, just duke it out and we'll take the winner?
Yeah, I don't see us getting involved. There's never in politics, as you know. But you know, my approach has always been, if you have good solid candidates running who have the ability to win the general election, then don't get involved. Let the people of that individual state determine who they want to have as their candidate running for the Senate, and that's what we have. in the 2 states that I mentioned. We have primaries, great candidates. They've been all just focused on how they are better and talking about their positives, not about running down any of their opponents. But let me just say, even though we're not putting our thumb on the scale for an individual candidate in these races, it's not that we're not involved. We're investing heavily in these states. In fact, we are investing record amounts of money into the ground campaign for these races, which is going to be critical in a midterm, so that whoever our candidate is, whoever he or she is, they'll immediately walk into a very robust campaign organization that's been working on the ground for several months.
Oversight, legislation, and work on the campaign trail. You are a busy guy. Senator Peters, thank you for joining us today.
Oh, great to be with you. Thank you.
Thanks much to Senator Gary Peters and Bob Cusack.